an Arizona woman's last-ditch attempt to save her failing marriage ended in an attempted murder charge in September of 2023 when she was accused of shooting her estranged husband in the wrist. 62-year-old Christina Pasqualetto drove 2 hours from her home in Gilbert to the home of 80-year-old John Pasqualetto in Yavapai County, where she arrived around midnight. John was in bed when Christina arrived, and the conversation between the two quickly escalated into a heated argument. Christina tried to talk John out of divorcing her, but he told her that he wanted the divorce and wasn't going to change his mind. He later told police that Christina shot him in response to his unwillingness to negotiate, and that he managed to knock the gun out of his estranged wife's hand before any more shots could be fired, giving him an opportunity to run to a neighbor's house for help. John survived with non-life-threatening injuries after being flown to the emergency room, and Christina was booked into custody on suspicion of attempted first-degree murder, aggravated assault, forgery, and theft. According to John, the former couple had been separated for several months at the time of the shooting. He had changed the locks to his home just a week earlier after his keys and several other items went missing, leading him to suspect that Christina had trespassed onto the property and stolen his belongings. He also accused his soon-to-be ex-wife of forging a $10,000 check after the suspected break-in. Unfortunately, updates have not been forthcoming, leaving the current status of the case unclear. Number 15. Brent Luyster. Late one night in 2016, a woman named Brianne Lee entered a convenience store in Woodland, Washington, with a gunshot wound to the face and alerted employees to her need for help. She was unable to speak but wrote a note telling responding officers that she and 3 others had been shot at a nearby residence. Police rushed to the home where they found the father of Lee's children, 36-year-old Zachary David Thompson and 38-year-old Joseph Mark Lamar, dead in the driveway. Inside the house, they found the body of 43-year-old Janelle Renee Knight. Lee escaped from the scene by army crawling away from the property and flagging down a passing motorist who drove her to the convenience store. She identified the shooter as 35-year-old Brent Luyster, a known white supremacist with a lengthy and violent criminal record and the best friend of victim David Thompson. According to prosecutors, Luyster had recently learned that a state-level assault case he was facing had been taken over by federal prosecutors. While his motive for committing the triple murder remains unclear to this day, authorities believe that he anticipated that his bail would be revoked and took his anger over the situation out on his friends. Luyster was arrested without incident following a day-long manhunt and was charged with 3 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 gun-related counts. He smiled during his first court appearance as the horrific details of his crimes were revealed, but he was no longer grinning when the jury found him guilty as charged in late 2017. Instead of showing any remorse for his actions, Luyster vehemently denied being the killer. Even after he was convicted on all counts, he appealed his case, arguing that the prosecution lacked any compelling evidence linking him to the triple homicide, but remains behind bars as he serves 3 life terms without the possibility of parole. Number 14. Michael Swanson. Kathleen Swanson awoke one morning in November of 2010 to discover her troubled teenage son, Michael Swanson, missing from their home in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. Her debit cards and Jeep had also vanished, indicating that the high schooler had fled on his own accord. She would later learn that Michael was on his way to northern Iowa, where he would be arrested later that evening for killing 2 convenience store clerks. The first murder occurred shortly after 9 p.m. when Michael entered a gas station in Algona wearing a mask and demanded cash and cigarettes. 47-year-old mother of 11, Vicky Bowman Hall, complied with the teen's orders, but he shot her anyway. From there, Michael drove 30 miles to Humboldt, where he entered another convenience store about an hour after the first murder and fatally shot 61-year-old Sheila Myers. Police caught up with him at a McDonald's restaurant a short while later and took him into custody without incident. Michael confessed to shooting both victims, claiming that he killed them to prevent them from calling the police or being able to identify him. He was eerily calm while discussing how he shot Myers in the face, saying, "I felt powerful, I just didn't care, and sometimes people get shot," as if his actions were no big deal. Michael already had a criminal history prior to his arrest. Despite his young age, he also displayed lifelong behavioral issues, which had only worsened with age. Despite his family's desperate attempts to get him help, his issues were evident to others as well, including the Swanson's neighbor, Wendy Sulzer, who told NBC News that she was a little shocked but not too surprised that Michael was accused of killing people. During the trial, Michael's mother, Kathleen, testified that she knew something was wrong with her son at a very young age. He rarely slept and showed violent tendencies by the time he was a toddler, causing his family to live in constant fear that he was going to hurt them. When Michael was just 11 years old, a psychiatrist had told Kathleen that her son was essentially a lost cause and that the only realistic solution was to lock him up. He was in his early teens when he was first put on probation, and he was just 16 when he committed a hit and run while driving drunk. Just like all his other crimes, Michael consistently showed a lack of remorse for the murders. He laughed at reporters while being escorted to his first court hearing, and he was seen smirking in the courtroom at the beginning of his trial. His defense attorney argued for an insanity verdict, but he ultimately pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and first-degree robbery. Michael was initially sentenced to life without parole, which was later commuted to life with the possibility of parole after 60 years. He was sentenced to an additional 25 years for attempted murder in 2015 after slashing a fellow inmate, and will remain behind bars at least until the year 2090, which means that he'll most likely die in prison. Number 13. Johan Williams. Known as the Boland serial killer, Johan Williams lured 3 innocent women to their deaths in South Africa's Western Cape province in 2012 and 2018 with the promise of a job. The bound and strangled bodies of 21-year-old Chantel Matthijssen, 35-year-old Natalie Yonkers, and 33-year-old Maria Isaacs were found discarded on a remote farm in 2018, following the disappearance of Williams' most recent victim, Chantel Matthijssen. Matthijssen had met Williams 2 years earlier at the Wellington train station where he worked as a security guard. He took the young woman and her son in for the evening after they took the wrong train and became stranded, and he helped them get home safely the next day. Williams became a close friend of Matthijssen's family, who were grateful to him for helping her. They never imagined that she would end up dead after accepting his offer for a job on a wine farm 2 years later. When Matthijssen's mother began receiving text messages from her daughter's phone that didn't match her typical spelling and grammar, she became concerned and called the police. Investigators found the remains of all 3 victims several weeks later during a search of Williams' property. Williams was charged with 20 crimes, including 3 counts of murder, 6 counts of kidnapping, assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm, failure to comply with the protection order, and more. He used numerous stalling tactics to delay facing justice, including routinely firing his public defenders and refusing to take the stand after announcing his plans to testify in his own defense. Just days after Williams was found guilty on all charges, in February of 2024, he fired his lawyer yet again, effectively delaying his sentencing by at least a month. He laughed hysterically in court while firing the attorney, making it clear that he was gaming the system and that he enjoyed doing it. His endless court antics have left the victims' families feeling taunted and like they're fighting a losing battle. Legal Aid South Africa initially refused to appoint Williams another lawyer, but a new attorney was assigned to the case in July. His next court hearing is in September. Number 12. Tyler James Dazey. 46-year-old Jennifer Ann Dazey and her pet dog were found dead in her Dubuque, Iowa home by a concerned friend who came to check on them in January of 2024. Jennifer's head and neck were covered in lacerations and 2 of her fingers had been cut off, while her dog bore evidence of a significant head injury, making it clear that they had met a murderous and violent end. Police found Jennifer's 28-year-old son, Tyler James Dazey, naked in his bedroom. He was not overly responsive, according to responding officers, and was taken to the hospital for an evaluation prior to being booked into custody on suspicion of first-degree murder and animal abuse. During his conversation with investigators, he admitted to being the owner of the tomahawk that police believe he killed his mother with. He also confessed to murdering Jennifer, claiming that the victim had been practicing witchcraft against him for years, but invoked his Miranda right to remain silent when questioned about how his mother got her injuries. Tyler bursted out laughing when the judge set his bond at $2 million during his first court hearing over video chat. At the end of the proceeding, he told the judge it was always a pleasure. He was ordered to undergo a mental evaluation and was initially found incompetent to stand trial in March of 2024. Roughly 2 months after the murder, the judge ordered him to undergo another evaluation and deemed him competent after reviewing the findings. Tyler refused to attend his trial, but the proceedings continued in his absence, despite his attorney's continued request for him to be declared incompetent. The jury found him guilty as charged in July of 2024 after deliberating for just 2 hours. A sentencing date has yet to be announced, but he's facing a mandatory life term without parole in accordance with Iowa law. Number 11. Demetrius Heade. In November of 2016, a 39-year-old Georgia man named Michael Harvey accidentally sideswiped a stolen minivan in Gwinnett County while attempting to pass the vehicle, causing his pickup truck to strike a pole and land in a ditch. The van was occupied by 30-year-old Demetrius Lamar Heade, who was driving, and his girlfriend, 35-year-old Talisha Lakeelia Tate, who was jolted awake by the impact of the crash while sleeping in the passenger seat. Tate would later testify that Harvey exited his truck and began approaching the minivan, most likely to make sure she and Heade were okay, and that Heade reacted by shooting him in the torso with a rifle through the vehicle's windshield. Harvey collapsed, and the couple threw the rifle into the ditch and fled on foot after discovering that the van had a flat tire. By the time police arrived at the scene, Tate and Heade were nowhere in sight and Harvey was dead. Investigators traced the stolen minivan to an owner in Mobile, Alabama, named Levester Brennan, who had been murdered 8 days earlier. Mobile police had identified Heade and Tate as suspects in the case after the pair were seen using Brennan's credit card, but they had gone on the run before any arrests could be made. Police also found several receipts from a nearby gas station inside the minivan and confirmed through surveillance footage that the wanted fugitives were frequent customers there. Officers waited at the gas station knowing it was likely only a matter of time before the pair returned and arrested them the day after Harvey's murder. Tate initially denied knowledge of either crime, but eventually admitted that she was with Heade when he killed both victims. Heade was subsequently charged with murder, aggravated assault and other offenses in connection with Harvey's death. When he learned that Tate had rolled on him during a court hearing about a month after his arrest, he could be seen rolling his eyes, shaking his head and laughing incredulously as a detective went over the information Tate had provided to law enforcement. Heade's behavior eventually became so disruptive that the judge told him to sit up and asked him how old he was. She told him to act his age and reminded him that he was in a courtroom, scolding him like a child for his disrespectful conduct. In May of 2019, a jury found Heade guilty of murder, felony murder, aggravated assault and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. He was sentenced to life without parole. Number 10. Tyrell Webster. 47-year-old Grover Watson Jr. was shot dead on his birthday at his Cincinnati, Ohio home in April of 2012. He was murdered during the early morning hours by his friend, 28-year-old Tyrell Webster, after he saw the killer abusing a pregnant woman and confronted him about it. Webster had gone to the residence to do laundry, drink, and play cards prior to the shooting. He was arrested later that day by a fugitive task force and tried blaming his girlfriend for the murder, but failed to convince the police that she was responsible. His first trial ended in a mistrial after the prosecution failed to turn over all the evidence to the defense for review. Webster was found guilty as charged following his second trial in October of 2013 and was sentenced to 18 years to life. During his sentencing hearing, the court heard a victim impact statement from the victim's sister, Carolyn O'Brien, who's legally blind. O'Brien began by saying that she wanted to forgive Webster, but she took a less merciful stance when the judge told her that the convicted killer was smiling and laughing, stating, "You laughing now, but the moment they get you behind those prison walls for the rest of your life, you will be somebody's girlfriend, and that smile will no longer be on your face." Number 9. Justin J. Paul. 50-year-old Jeanette Paul was found unresponsive with multiple stab wounds in her Westland, Michigan home in December of 2017 by her neighbor, Cindy Hedger, who had received a terrifying voicemail of her screaming and crying in a state of sheer terror. Hedger desperately looked for a sign of life while waiting for emergency responders to arrive, but it was too late to save Jeanette, who had been stabbed repeatedly in the throat and back. Blood evidence indicated that she had been dragged through the house before the killer fled the scene. Investigators spoke with Hedger's son, Nathan, who said that he had seen Justin fleeing the home on foot shortly before his mother went over to check on Jeanette. He told police that he ran after Justin but was unable to catch up with him. Justin was apprehended later that day after being shot in the thigh during a struggle with pursuing officers. He denied killing his mother, despite having blood on his face, and smiled for his mugshot after being treated for his gunshot wound. The accused murderer's father, Vern Paul, told Click on Detroit that his son suffered from bipolar disorder and ADHD, but that there were no problems between Justin and his mother. His motive for killing Jeanette remains a mystery to this day. He pleaded guilty but mentally ill to second-degree murder in January of 2019 and was sentenced to 18 to 60 years in prison. Number 8. Bionca Ellis. The death of a child is no joke to most people, but this was apparently not the case for accused killer 32-year-old Bionca Ellis, who laughed and smiled in a Cleveland, Ohio courtroom while facing charges for the brutal murder of a little boy named Julian Wood. According to prosecutors, Ellis stole a pair of knives and viciously stabbed the victim to death outside a Giant Eagle grocery store in North Olmsted in June of 2024. She also stabbed Julian's 38-year-old mother as she tried to pull her son out of her shopping cart in an attempt to save his life. The mother survived her injuries, and Ellis was charged with aggravated murder, attempted murder, felonious assault, endangering children, tampering with evidence, and misdemeanor theft. Authorities believe that the attack was random and have yet to reveal a suspected motive. Ellis laughed while the charges were being read out loud during her initial court hearing. Her bizarre behavior has led to speculation about whether she's competent to stand trial and whether it would be appropriate for her defense attorneys to argue for a not guilty plea by reason of insanity. Concerns had previously been raised about her mental health following past run-ins with the police. A defendant's competency refers to their current ability or lack thereof to assist with their defense during their trial. An insanity defense, on the other hand, argues that the individual was incapable of discerning right from wrong when they committed the crime, and that they did not act in a premeditated fashion. As the case moves forward, the court may also explore the possibility of utilizing non-criminal procedures to institutionalize Ellis based on the argument that she's a danger to herself or others. For now, she remains held without bail at the Cuyahoga County Jail as she awaits her next court date. Number 7. Dantri Wright. 18-year-old Jordan Clee was found dead from a single gunshot wound in the yard of his Ann Arbor, Michigan home following a botched robbery attempt in October of 2018. Prosecutors charged 3 suspects in connection with the crime, including the accused gunman, Dantri Wright, and his co-conspirators, Delrino Gracie and Jamarius Ellison. Gracie and Ellison took plea deals and agreed to testify against Wright, who unexpectedly confessed to killing Clee during a pre-trial hearing in hopes of landing a plea bargain. His attorneys negotiated with prosecutors and reached an agreement which would come with a 25 to 52-year prison sentence in exchange for Wright's guilty plea, but the judge almost revoked the deal when Wright grinned during the victim impact statements that Plea's loved ones read in court. Infuriated by the defendant's mockery of the victim's family's pain and suffering, the judge threatened to revoke the plea agreement and take the case to trial. He left the decision up to Plea's family, who opted to move forward with the plea deal so that they could put the court case behind them and start healing from the senseless tragedy. They chose to forgive Wright despite his despicable behavior for the sake of their own mental and emotional well-being. Wright's defense attorney apologized on his client's behalf, claiming that the teen smiles when he's nervous. His mother, Angenette Welk, later told MLive.com that her son dealt with everything in life by smiling and that she believed Wright smiled during the victim impact statement due to mental health problems. Wright had a chance to apologize for his actions during his sentencing hearing, but chose not to, instead telling his family that he loved them and would see them soon. He now has plenty of time to reflect on his actions as he sits in prison, with an earliest possible release date of 2042. The killer could remain behind bars until 2078 and will be somewhere between 43 and 70 years old when he sees freedom again. Number 6. Jessica Smith. A mother from Washington state committed the unthinkable in July of 2014 when she viciously attacked her daughters at a resort in Cannon Beach, Oregon. 40-year-old Jessica Smith drowned her daughter, Isabella, and stabbed her other daughter, Alana, who were both found in a hotel room after their mother had fled the scene. Housekeepers had tried entering the room that morning and were told to go away. They called the police after they heard what sounded like someone falling and were unable to open the door, which was deadbolted from inside. Responding officers broke into the room and encountered a blood-covered scene that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. Smith was located in her car along a remote logging road and taken into custody several days later. She was charged with aggravated murder and aggravated attempted murder. According to court documents, Jessica and her estranged husband, Greg Smith, were in the process of divorcing when the horrific crime occurred. She had recently been denied an order of protection against Greg, who cooperated with law enforcement and was quickly ruled out as a suspect. During the divorce proceedings, Greg had requested a psychological evaluation of Jessica, expressing concerns over her mental health. Jessica was under court order to return the kids to Greg the same day she drove them to the resort and carried out the disturbing attack. Neighbors who lived near the family in Goldendale, Washington, told local station KOIN6 News that they had harbored concerns over Smith's mental stability. At one point throughout her court proceedings, she claimed that she was too mentally ill to face trial. A competency evaluation yielded inconclusive results, but as far as the prosecution was concerned, Jessica was a narcissistic, cold-hearted killer who acted with intent and knew right from wrong. This much seemed evident during a court hearing in May of 2015, when she was seen smiling and winking at cameras as she entered the room. The defense insisted that Jessica had lost her mind, leading to lengthy delays in the case. She eventually gave up on the insanity angle and pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and aggravated attempted murder, landing her a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 38 years. Number 5. Jesus Ayala and Jasimir Keys in a sickening act of violence that was captured on camera in September of 2023. A pair of teens fatally mowed down a former police chief during his morning bicycle ride in Las Vegas. 64-year-old Andreas Probst had moved to Sin City from Southern California following his retirement from the Bell Police Department in 2009 and was minding his own business when the killers intentionally struck him during a joyride in a stolen Hyundai sedan. 18-year-old Jesus Ayala was driving while his friend Jasimir Keys recorded the crime from the passenger seat. In the video, Keys could be heard encouraging Ayala to hit Probst. After saying, "Ready?" Ayala pulled up right behind Probst, who was riding in the bike lane, honked the horn, and plowed into the elderly cyclist, who was thrown from his bike. Keys continued to film as Probst lay dying on the pavement, and the heartless teens could be heard laughing as they drove away. showing zero concern for the stranger they had just rammed into for no reason. Based on the video, it was clear to investigators that the suspects hit Probst on purpose and that the victim's death was no accident. Ayala and Keyes are both facing charges of murder, attempted murder, battery, and more, but they still do not appear to be taking the situation seriously. Video captured during a court hearing in October of 2023 showed the teens laughing and flipping the middle finger at the family of Probst. Criminal defense attorney Mace Yampolsky, who is not involved in the case, told local news outlet KTNV that the defendants' behavior could hurt their case despite their young age, due to the sheer remorselessness of their actions, which reflects a lack of regard for human life. Former Clark County District Attorney David Roger echoed similar sentiments, stating that the accused killer's conduct will come back to haunt them, especially if they try to show remorse in the future. Ayala and Keyes were originally scheduled to go to trial in September of 2024, but the proceedings will likely be delayed after a judge granted the defense's motion for Ayala to undergo a competency evaluation. The outcome of the case remains to be seen. Number 4. Angenette Welk. 44-year-old Angenette Welk had nothing to smile about after striking 60-year-old Sandra Clarkston while driving drunk in Ocala, Florida in May of 2018, but she flashed an ear-to-ear grin for her mugshot, which quickly went viral as her victim clung to life in the emergency room. Welk was initially charged with DUI causing serious bodily injury. The charge was upgraded to DUI manslaughter 4 days later after Clarkston succumbed to her injuries. Although Welk appears happy in her mugshot, her defense attorney Stacey Yeomans described the accused killer as a good-hearted person who is devastated by what happened, and she certainly wasn't smiling during her sentencing hearing when she was handed an 11-year prison sentence, followed by 15 years of probation after pleading no contest to DUI manslaughter and 2 counts of DUI with property damage. Welk apologized to Clarkston's surviving family members and said that she would trade places with the victim if she could. She became eligible for parole after serving 4 years, but remains incarcerated with a projected release date of December 2028. Number 3. T.J. Lane. 6 high school students were shot in rural Chardon, Ohio on the morning of February 27, 2012, when their former classmate opened fire on them in their school cafeteria without warning. 5 of the victims were hospitalized, including Daniel Parmator, Russell King Jr., and Demetrius Heade, who died from their injuries. Thomas Michael T.J. Lane III was apprehended at the scene and was later indicted on 3 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of aggravated attempted murder, and 1 count of felonious assault. During his arrest, he was wearing a t-shirt with the word "killer" scrawled across the chest in capital letters. Witnesses told investigators that Lane had a personal rivalry with victim Russell King and that he appeared to specifically target King during the shooting. The dispute between the teens reportedly dated back to more than a year earlier, and both parties had long anticipated a fight with one another. Lane was well liked by many of his peers despite his issues with King. Acquaintances and friends described him as often sad and coming from a broken home, but otherwise normal. Some people claimed that Lane had been bullied and that it had affected his mental health, while others denied that this was the case. Following his arrest, Lane admitted to firing 10 gunshots and denied knowing his victims, claiming that he had selected them at random. His mental health fell at the center of the case, but he was ultimately deemed competent to stand trial. In February of 2013, he pleaded guilty to all charges. The following month, he entered the courtroom for his sentencing hearing and removed his button-down shirt to reveal a white t-shirt with the word "killer" handwritten across the chest, just like he had worn at the time of the shooting. He smirked and smiled throughout the proceeding and flipped the middle finger to the victims' families while saying, "All of you," showing a complete lack of remorse for his actions. Today's topic was requested by Magneto Hex 703 and Millennials Best. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Vicky Bevan. 37-year-old Vicky Bevan was arrested in Merseyside, England in 2021 for filming herself committing dozens of unspeakable acts against vulnerable young victims. She fell under suspicion after investigators discovered evidence of her crimes in a cell phone that had been seized from another predator. Police raided Bevan's home in St. Helens later that year, and she confessed to her illicit acts in early 2023. She was charged with nearly 3 dozen crimes and initially pleaded not guilty, despite admitting to the offenses. Authorities also charged Bevan's accomplices, 62-year-old Paul Rafferty and 42-year-old Tony Hutton. During an initial court hearing, Bevan could be seen smiling and laughing with bailiffs while she sat alongside her co-defendants. Rafferty pleaded guilty to 10 charges in April of 2022 and was sentenced to a decade in prison, while Hutton admitted to 4 charges and received a 4-year sentence. Bevan tearfully pleaded guilty to 34 charges the following month and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 10 years. Her attorney pleaded with the court for leniency, claiming that Bevan's mental health had deteriorated following the breakup of her marriage, while the prosecution argued that she would have undoubtedly continued to offend if she hadn't gotten caught. The judge deemed her a dangerous offender and sentenced her accordingly, warning her that she would not automatically be released after serving the 10-year minimum of her term. If you thought ignoring the law was a clever idea, think again. After number 1, we've got some regretful crimes coming up in our previous release of 11 criminals who probably regretted their decisions. Number 1. Luis Bracamontes. Mexican national Luis Bracamontes had already been deported from the United States twice when he killed 2 sheriff's deputies in Northern California during a methamphetamine-fueled crime spree with his wife in October of 2014. Acting under one of the many aliases he was known to use, Bracamontes shot Sacramento County Deputy Danny Oliver in the head with an AR-15 outside a Motel 6. As Oliver approached his vehicle, he ran over Oliver's body with his car as he fled the scene and went on to carjack several vehicles, shooting one car owner 3 times in the face. The victim miraculously survived, and Bracamontes proceeded to steal a Mustang and a pickup truck as he continued his campaign of terror. While driving along Interstate 80 in the stolen pickup truck, the fleeing fugitives noticed signs alerting motorists to the vehicle and its armed and dangerous occupants. Bracamontes pulled off the highway and attempted to lay low in a cul-de-sac in Auburn, where he got into a shootout with Placer County deputies. He shot Detective Michael Davis Jr., who died at the scene, and Davis's partner, who survived with serious injuries. At that point, his wife decided it was in her best interest to surrender to law enforcement, but Bracamontes continued to flee and was apprehended at a stranger's home following an extensive manhunt. According to prosecutors, Bracamontes and his wife had lived a fairly normal, working-class existence in Utah for years leading up to the murders. Their marriage was dysfunctional, and Bracamontes was a habitual drug user, but their lives took a major downturn in the months leading up to the shootings after they both started abusing methamphetamine. Paranoid that the police were out to get him and that his brother was sleeping with his wife, Bracamontes told his wife to get in his car and left Utah with no solid destination in mind. They ended up at the Motel 6 in Sacramento, where Bracamontes saw Oliver patrolling the parking lot and became irrationally paranoid. He shot Oliver before they could even have a conversation, marking the beginning of the couple's crime spree. Bracamontes openly admitted to killing Oliver and Davis and made it clear during his court proceedings that he felt no remorse for his actions. His defense attorneys argued that he was too mentally ill to face trial and urged the judge to allow him to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, highlighting his repeated courtroom outbursts as evidence of his incompetence. The defense also claimed that Bracamontes was plagued by meth-induced delusions, but their request for an insanity plea was repeatedly denied, and the case finally moved forward after nearly 4 years of delays. During his trial in early 2018, Bracamontes laughed and said that he planned to kill more cops while spewing vile statements at the victims' families. He also threatened to kill jurors as he was removed from the courtroom due to his behavior. Perhaps not surprisingly, the jury found him guilty on all counts and voted in favor of the death penalty. Bracamontes smiled, laughed, and said, "Yay!" as the judge read the verdict. He remains on death row, but will probably never be executed due to an indefinite moratorium on capital punishment that was signed into law by Governor Gavin Newsom In 2019, the moratorium will remain in place at least until the end of Newsom's term in 2027 and will likely continue if a Democratic successor is elected. In the meantime, the state's condemned prisoners languish behind bars with an uncertain future. A man who allegedly broke into a home on June the 17th of 2017 ended up in the hospital after he was beaten up by the individual who resided there. It was unbeknownst to 28-year-old John Alexander Bracken that someone was inside the Monroe Avenue residence when he kicked the front door in at around 9 p.m. A struggle then ensued between the burglar and the homeowner. After being notified of the break-in, law enforcement arrived and found the suspect laying in the front yard while the resident was reportedly uninjured. Bracken was taken to a medical center for treatment and later booked into the New Hanover County Jail in lieu of a $7,500 bond. He was facing charges of burglary, injury to personal property, and injury to real property. Number 10. Johnny Calderon Jr. and Gerald Allen. Two of the three men who attempted to pull off an armed robbery in Charlottesville, Virginia on August 27th of 2013 were left in blood and bruised in the face. During the robbery, one of the suspects, 19-year-old Johnny Calderon Jr., had his firearm knocked out of his hand by one of the victims. The two intended targets then attacked the would-be robbers. One of the suspects, who wasn't identified, subsequently seized the weapon and fled the scene as his partners were being pummeled. When law enforcement responded to the scene in the 2300 block of Fontaine Avenue, they found Calderon and Gerald Allen, aged 18, in the custody of the two unidentified male victims. The pair were reportedly taken to a hospital for treatment before being arrested. Both were charged with 2 counts of attempted robbery, while Calderon was additionally accused of pointing a firearm and using a firearm in the commission of a felony. Eventually, 2 counts of using a firearm in a felony were added to Allen's charges as well. Allen pleaded guilty and in 2015 was sentenced to 3 years in prison for the firearm offenses, while the 12-year sentence for attempted robbery was suspended. Calderon also pleaded guilty and faced the same punishment. Number 9. Exon Caceres. At the Pilot Travel Center in Medley, Florida, a man attempting to steal a massive semi-truck was beaten up in a revenge pummeling on March the 9th of 2023. The incident took place on Northwest South River Drive when the alleged thief got into an unlocked semi-truck that was left running at a gas pump at approximately 10:30 a.m. The owner of the semi was in the store when he noticed that his blue 18-wheeler was in motion. He initially thought it was rolling by itself, but then saw a man behind the wheel. Footage of the theft was captured on camera as the victim chased after his stolen vehicle. The suspect floored it, seemingly trying to run over the men chasing him, and he consequently rammed into other cars. Eventually, the truck owner and another man were able to get the driver out of the cab and beat him up. According to Medley police, they were able to zip tie his hands and knees to immobilize him. Officers later arrested the suspect, identified as 24-year-old Exon Caceres. In Miami-Dade court, Caceres was ordered to stay away from the gas station and the victim. He faced multiple charges, including battery, grand theft, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Number 8. Corey Curnutt and Savannah Grillo. In 2019, a California couple carried out violent vigilante attacks on bike thieves and posted footage of the beatings on YouTube. 25-year-old Corey Curnutt and Savannah Grillo, aged 29, would reportedly leave a bicycle unlocked in the front yard of their Visalia home and wait for someone to try and steal it. At least 4 people attempted to take the planted bike between July and November and were beaten with a baseball bat for their misdeeds. The injuries sustained by the would-be thieves were described as non-life-threatening by local law enforcement. A neighbor stated that there would be blood in the street or on the sidewalks after the contrived beatings. On January the 8th of 2020, Curnutt and Grillo were detained on assault with a deadly weapon and conspiracy charges. The pair subsequently bailed out of jail and the videos of their assaults were taken down from the internet. The public information officer from the Visalia Police Department stated that investigators believed the couple's crimes were born out of frustration with ongoing vehicle burglaries in the area. Number 7. Liam Jones. Liam Jones, who'd formerly been convicted of various criminal charges, pulled out a bladed article on his friend during an argument over drugs. The incident, which took place in the town of Bargoed, South Wales in 2022 began when the 31-year-old smoked marijuana in a shed at Ashley Boylan's home. The latter accused Jones of stealing cannabis before a heated confrontation ensued. Jones pulled out a machete and swung it mere inches from his friend's face. Boylan then shouted to his partner, who was in the house with her children, to call the police. Jones took off carrying the weapon while Boylan and another man chased after him. He attempted to get into another residence but was pulled to the floor by his pursuers. He ultimately dropped the machete after Boylan picked up a piece of wood and hit him, leaving him with nasty injuries prior to his arrest. During Jones's trial, the prosecution highlighted the fact that he had previous convictions for robbery, burglary, wounding, and arson on his record. According to the man's lawyer, he suffered from an addiction to drugs and was diagnosed with ADHD. Wales Online reported on June the 9th of 2022 that Jones had been jailed for a year after admitting causing an affray and being in possession of a weapon. Number 6. Robber with a cardboard gun. On the night of January the 5th of 2019 in Rio, Brazil, a man who tried to rob a woman with a cardboard gun was punched, kicked, and locked in a rear naked choke before being arrested. 26-year-old Polyana Viana, a UFC fighter, was waiting for an Uber outside her apartment at around 8 p.m. when a man approached and asked her for the time. She answered, but he then continued lingering in close proximity to her. That was when the man told her to hand over her phone and not to cause a scene because he was armed. When the suspect put his hand over the weapon, Viana realized that it was a cardboard cutout and struck him with 2 punches and a kick. When the man fell, Viana subdued him with a chokehold from behind. Viana later said in an interview that the would-be robber then asked her to call authorities because he was afraid to be beaten up even more. In the aftermath, the man was left with a bloodied face. Nearby civilians called law enforcement, and the suspect was subsequently taken to a healthcare facility to have his injuries treated before being taken to the police station. The man had reportedly been arrested before and had just been released from custody shortly before the attempted robbery. Number 5. Anthony Nemeth. On Valentine's Day 2016, 25-year-old David West knocked an alleged robber down to protect his girlfriend, who was behind the counter of a Walgreens pharmacy in Bradenton, Florida. West, who was visiting his girlfriend, who was working that night, when a masked man later identified as 26-year-old Anthony Nemeth jumped over the counter demanding all the oxycodone 30s in the store. Nemeth reportedly claimed he had a gun. A struggle, which was captured by a surveillance camera in the store, subsequently broke out as West tried to tackle the suspect. After throwing 4 punches, West took the man to the ground and held him down until authorities arrived. The suspect was then taken to Blake Medical Center for treatment. According to a police affidavit, no items were stolen and no firearm was found on the would-be robber. West told ABC News that he was simply protecting the one he loved. Nemeth, who was charged with first-degree attempted robbery, appeared battered and bloodied in his mugshot. According to online booking records for Manatee County, he was held in custody on a $15,000 bond. Number 4. Anthony Prestopine. Anthony Prestopine got beaten up with a frying pan after he allegedly tried to force himself on a Pennsylvania woman in November of 2015. The 33-year-old was invited by the woman to her Sharon home for a drink. According to the police, the two were watching a movie when the woman fell asleep. She told investigators that when she woke up, Prestopine was attempting to assault her. He was asked to leave, and when he refused, the woman hit him in the face with a skillet, leaving him with a large cut on his cheek, blood on his nose, and a black eye, all of which were displayed in his resulting booking photo. Prestopine was held in custody on an assault charge. Number 3. Anthony Hall. A serial burglar from Newcastle, England, was left with serious injuries after he broke into an ex-rugby player's home on September the 8th of 2014. 22-year-old Anthony Hall entered the Red Car residence belonging to 48-year-old Stephen Waterfield at around 12:30 a.m. Waterfield heard a noise and went to the living room, where he saw Hall with both hands on his TV. Hall claimed that he thought it was his friend's property and subsequently lunged at the homeowner, who was once a flanker for Redcar's Union rugby team. Waterfield defended himself as the burglar reportedly bombarded him with kicks and punches. Eventually, the victim overpowered Hall and called the authorities. The suspect kicked Waterfield in the face as he attempted to flee. In his efforts to detain Hall, the ex-rugby player left him with gashes to his head, a bruised left eye, and a swollen cheekbone. Hall eventually left empty-handed but was arrested shortly thereafter. He later admitted to the burglary and was sentenced to 40 months in prison on November the 27th of 2014. Number 2. James Wood. 53-year-old James Wood of Aberdeen, Scotland, was left with 2 black eyes after stealing from his mother, Elizabeth, on December the 21st of 2014. After entering his mother's sheltered flat in the middle of the night, James took almost $300 from the 83-year-old's purse. His son, 25-year-old Matthew Wood, later discovered the money hidden inside a sofa at James's Torrey flat and reported it to the authorities. Before an arrest was made, James was allegedly beaten up by Matthew on January the 24th of 2015. When law enforcement took James into custody, he immediately confessed to the theft, but the cash was never recovered. At Aberdeen Sheriff Court, Wood was sentenced to 100 hours of unpaid work. He apologized, saying he was thoroughly ashamed by his behavior. His son also appeared in court, charged with assault causing severe injury, but he wasn't ultimately prosecuted due to a lack of evidence. The incident wasn't the first time James had stolen from his mother, explaining why he wasn't given a key to the mother's flat. According to the prosecution, James was said to have become an alcoholic after losing his job years earlier. For that reason, he claimed he couldn't even remember taking his mother's cash that night. Number 1. Anthony Miranda. On December the 2nd of 2011, convicted felon Anthony Miranda attempted to rob a martial arts expert who left him with cuts and bruises on his face. In Chicago at around 11:30 p.m., a 33-year-old man, only identified as Justin, was sitting in his car near Kenneth Avenue and 55th Street. 24-year-old Miranda approached him and asked him if he had a lighter. When Justin replied that he didn't, Miranda allegedly brandished a handgun and profanely demanded money. According to authorities, after the victim gave up his money, the mugger told him to get out of the car. Justin subsequently gained control of the gun, causing Miranda to shoot his own ankle in the process. Miranda was then brought to the ground and restrained until police officers arrived. Before being booked into jail, the suspect was treated at Holy Cross Hospital. He was then charged with armed robbery and aggravated discharge of a firearm. According to the Cook County Sheriff's Office, Miranda's bond was later set at $350,000. Thanks for watching. What is the largest fine you have ever had to pay and what was it for? Let us know in the comments section below.